The outer rim world of Daskara lay in smoldering ruin, its twin suns casting a crimson haze over the horizon as the last echoes of rebellion faded into silence. A fleet of black-armored storm cruisers drifted above the charred surface, casting long shadows across the wreckage. In the heart of the command ship, a man stood at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back, unmoved by the devastation below. His name was General Cale Thorne. Thorne's reputation reached beyond the reach of star charts. Whispers of his name stirred fear even in the depths of pirate colonies and smuggler dens. But to the Galactic Council, he was something more dangerous than a warlord. He was a necessary weapon. They called him when diplomacy failed. They unleashed him when politics grew cowardly. And he always delivered. Today was no exception. Behind him, the tactical board hummed softly, displaying casualty reports and data streams. A junior officer approached, hesitant, eyes flickering nervously to the back of Thorne's silver head. Casualty estimates confirmed. Minimal civilian loss. Resistance force eliminated. Total compliance projected within 12 hours. Thorne turned, his face a sculpture of focus and cold calculation. His silver beard, immaculately trimmed, framed a mouth that seldom smiled. His eyes, sharp and pale as glacial steel, fixed on the officer with brief acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "File the report directly to Counselor Merrick. Skip the standard relay." The officer blinked. "Sir? That would bypass protocol." "Precisely." The officer saluted stiffly and left. Alone again, Thorne exhaled. Not out of exhaustion, but out of routine. The war on Daskara had not tested him. It was a predictable confrontation. What bothered him, what always bothered him, was what came after. The waiting, the questions from the council, the scrutiny of those who had never once tasted war and yet claimed to understand it. He moved to his chair, throne-like in design, surrounded by control panels and communication links, and sat. Around him, stormtroopers in polished white armor stood silent as statues. Loyal, efficient, unquestioning. A chime sounded. Incoming transmission. The hologram flickered into form. Counselor Merrick, face pinched, robes immaculate, tone dismissive. "You're late reporting, General," Merrick began. "I'm early delivering," Thorne countered. A pause. Then Marek's expression shifted ever so slightly. Another clean sweep? No prisoners. No surviving command. Their leadership was executed at the onset. It shortened the engagement. Marek's lips twitched. "Your methods saved us a month of siege warfare. Your methods would have cost us 10,000 troops." Silence fell. Then Merrick leaned forward. "There are whispers, General, within the council. Some say your authority grows, unsupervised. Then they should supervise better." Merrick did not rise to the bait. "Just understand, not everyone views you as indispensable." Thorne gave a thin smile. "Then they haven't seen what I've stopped." The transmission cut. The room dimmed. Outside the viewport, the storm cruisers began to pull away, their mission complete. But even as they left, Thorne's mind drifted, not to victory, but to the next fault line in the galaxy's fragile order. Daskara had been a flare-up. There would be more. Always more. He rose and made his way to the lower decks. Past the hangar bays and fighter rows, past the medical wing and cryo cells, was a chamber locked to all but his own imprint. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, circular room ringed with archives, strategy records, and war relics from a dozen dead worlds. At the center stood a solitary pedestal upon which rested a small, unassuming object, a rusted insignia from his homeworld, long since annexed by the early council. He picked it up. The metal was cold. He remembered fire, screams, soldiers dragging families into forced relocations. The council's emblem on every banner. They had come to bring order. They had succeeded. But the price had been buried under marble monuments and official records rewritten by historians too young to remember what it had cost. He placed the insignia back down and turned to leave. Moments later, his second-in-command, Commander Rylus, met him at the lift. "New directives, sir," she said, handing over a datapad. "There's unrest near the Valen corridor. Intermittent attacks. Pirates, we think." Thorne scanned the details. "No, not pirates. Too structured. Someone's testing our patrols. You think the resistance is reorganizing? I think we didn't kill enough of them the last time." She hesitated. "The council won't sanction a full deployment without proof." "I'll give them proof," he said, eyes narrowing. But not the kind they can ignore. Back on the bridge, as the ship entered hyperspace, Thorne sat again in his command seat, framed by the endless starlight flickering past. He knew how this would go. The Council would delay. They always did. They feared being seen as tyrants even while their enemies plotted in the dark. He, however, did not fear such labels. He had long since stopped caring whether history called him hero or villain. Only the results mattered. And as the stars blurred into the white tunnel of hyperspace, General Cale Thorne began preparing for a war that had not yet officially begun. But it would, because order was fragile, and Cale Thorne was its most dangerous defender. The chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered under the soft blue light of the central prism, a massive crystalline structure pulsing with subtle energy. Rows of delegates, representatives from hundreds of systems, floated in silence within their suspended pods. At the very center, seated within a carved obsidian chair adorned with ceremonial etchings, was Counselor Merrick. His expression, as always, was unreadable, part diplomat, part executioner. Above the central dais, a holographic display played out footage from Doskera. No sound, just images. Stormtroopers moving like a tide. Tactical strikes. Civilians herded under watch. Explosions trimmed to surgical precision. And finally, General Cale Thorne, standing among the ash with a calm that bordered on disdain. The footage ended. A beat passed. Counselor Vess, a thin woman with a translucent veil over her features, finally spoke. What we've seen is not just a military maneuver. It is a declaration of unchecked force. A warning, to us as much as to our enemies. Merrick responded without flinching. It is a demonstration of order. Doskera resisted council law. That resistance is no longer a concern. Is that the measure now? Vess's voice sharpened. If we dissent, do we find his soldiers at our doorsteps? Others stirred, not in protest, but unease. A few glanced nervously at the dormant feed where Thorne's face had just appeared. Marek's gaze remained fixed. General Thorne is loyal. Efficient. The outer systems are in alignment thanks to him. Would any of you prefer another Zentar uprising? The room darkened momentarily, as if the memory of Zentar cast a shadow of its own. The uprising had almost shattered the Eastern Quadrant, a nightmare of factional violence and orbital bombardment. Thorne had ended it in 5 days. Still, the murmurs continued. In a private corridor after the session, Merrick walked swiftly, his ceremonial robes brushing against the floor. He was joined by Sarah Dallin, a younger counselor from the education sphere, known more for idealism than strategy. He frightens them, she said bluntly. He should, Merrick replied. It keeps them aligned. Sarah folded her arms. But fear doesn't build unity. It breeds resentment, distrust. He's not just fighting wars anymore, Merrick. He's making them. Merrick stopped. Then let him. As long as he makes them in the right direction. Elsewhere, light years away, Thorne stood at the edge of the Valen corridor, watching a set of data pulses unfold across the command screen. The corridor was a narrow band of starspace connecting several neutral worlds, a crucial artery for commerce, diplomacy, and smuggling. In the last week, 5 trade convoys had vanished. The Council labeled it piracy. Thorne knew better. The attacks were too precise. Communications were jammed seconds before interception. Escorts were drawn away by false signals. Whoever orchestrated this had training. He turned to Commander Rylas. Send a probe team into Sector Theta. Passive scan. I want signal patterns, not bodies. She nodded and moved to execute the order without question. The silence stretched after she left. Thorne stood still, surrounded by the quiet hum of systems. He had learned long ago that silence revealed more than noise. In silence, men contemplated. In silence, doubt grew. And recently, there had been too much of it. On the council, in his ranks, and, if he admitted it, within himself. But hesitation was a luxury, one he had no time for. Later that cycle, a secure channel crackled to life. Only one person had that encryption level, Counselor Merrick. The hologram formed in Thorne's private chamber. We've received feedback, Merrick began. Concerns about your methods. Again, Thorne sat, folding his gloved hands. From whom? Merrick didn't answer directly. There are eyes watching you now, even within the council. There always were. Be careful. If they find an excuse to bring you down, they will. And they won't need much. Thorne's voice dropped. They forget what I protect them from. No, Merrick said softly. They just think they can protect themselves now. As the feed ended, Thorne sat in silence again, but this time it felt heavier. He trusted Merrick as much as he trusted anyone in politics. But trust, to him, was like weaponry, useful until it failed. That night, on the lower decks, a different conversation was taking place. Lieutenant Casson, one of the newer intelligence officers, sat in a dimmed terminal bay, his eyes scanning encrypted messages from fringe systems. He wasn't supposed to see what he saw. The leak was buried deep, coded reports funneled directly from a council relay to unknown nodes. A pattern emerged: shipment logs, troop redeployments, surveillance footage, all trailing to a source labeled Spectre 1. Casson leaned closer. Suddenly, his console darkened. A red warning flashed. Unauthorized access detected. He bolted upright just as a shadow appeared behind him. Commander Rylas. You found something, she said, calm as water. He swallowed. Ma'am, there's a leak in the upper relay. Someone's feeding resistance networks. She nodded. I know. Now forget you saw it. But, you want to help the general? She asked, eyes fixed on his. He nodded once. Then trust me when I say, whoever Spectre 1 is, they're close. And if they realize you're onto them, you won't be. Casson hesitated, then logged off. Rylas watched him go, then turned to the console. Her expression hardened. Back in the council's inner sanctum, a small group met off-record, faces hooded in shadow, voices disguised through auditory dampeners. Counselor Vess stood among them. He's consolidating power. His forces operate outside our standard checks. We either move now, or lose what control we have left. One of the figures replied, we move. But quietly. No accusations. We find the evidence. And if there is none, then we manufacture it. On the surface, the council remained unified. But beneath, the fractures deepened. Thorne was no longer simply the blade of the council. He was a threat to the balance. A force unto himself. Back aboard his command ship, Thorne reviewed the latest scan from Sector Theta. A single beacon pulsed from an asteroid field. Too faint to be distress. Too strong to be random. A message. An invitation. He stared at it, then whispered, come out, then. Let's see what you've become. The stars beyond the viewport sparkled like waiting eyes. The hunt had begun. The asteroid field in Sector Theta loomed like a graveyard of ancient gods, shattered fragments of celestial rock drifting endlessly through the void. Thorne's command ship, Resolute, exited hyperspace at the edge of the belt, cloaked and silent. No comms, no lights. Only the heartbeat of its engines pulsing beneath the hull like a predator's breath before the strike. Thorne stood at the forward observation deck, eyes trained on the rotating chaos ahead. Somewhere in that spinning maze, someone was waiting. Someone with enough knowledge to bait a fleet and enough precision to vanish without trace. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in tacticians. Deploy recon drones, silent mode, he ordered. Track emissions, gravitational inconsistencies. Anything that twitches. Commander Rylas nodded and relayed the command. The deck fell into the tension of silent anticipation. In war, Thorne had learned that stillness could be more dangerous than battle. Stillness meant planning. Stillness meant someone was thinking as hard as you were. He didn't like it. The drones fanned out like metal insects, weaving into the asteroid field with silent thrusters. For several minutes, the only sound on the bridge was the hum of processors and the low rhythm of Thorne's breath. Then, one of the displays lit up. A signal, barely a pulse. Localized energy signature, Rylas said. High frequency, encrypted. Not standard military. Doesn't match any known pirate encryption either. Where is it broadcasting to? Not broadcasting. Looping. Like a beacon. Short range. Thorne's eyes narrowed. A lure. But he gave the order anyway. They moved in. Aboard one of the smaller interceptors, Thorne led a team of 4 through the maze. Engines whispered against the silence of space, shadows from the rotating rocks casting long, shifting shapes on their hull. They found it tucked between 2 slabs of floating rock, an old comms relay, repurposed and half-shielded in wreckage. It had no power source, no transmission line, just one message, cycling on a self-sustaining loop. Rylas played it aloud. A voice, distorted, metallic, but unmistakably human. We remember Zentar. We remember your fire. The tide returns. It cut off, then looped again. Rylus looked at Thorn. Who would use Xintar as a rallying cry? The council buried those records. He didn't answer. He was staring at the device, not in confusion, but recognition. I've heard that voice before, he said. 10 years ago. He stepped back into the pilot bay, keyed in a personal command, and pulled up an old, classified file. A face appeared. Younger, sharper, eyes like storms. The file read, Commander Aaron Voss. Presumed dead. Leader of the Xintar resistance. But Thorn remembered the last time they met. Voss had been captured during the final hours of the uprising, cornered in a collapsed bunker beneath the capital. Thorn himself had interrogated him. Voss had spoken of revolution, not against the council, but against what he called the abuse behind the banner. He'd predicted the council's descent into tyranny. His execution was never confirmed. His body never recovered. And now his voice echoed through deep space. Thorn returned to the Resolute with a hardened expression. If Voss had survived, it wasn't by chance. Someone within the council had helped him. Someone with access. Someone with motive. In the war room, the officers gathered. He replayed the signal once, then turned to face them. This is not piracy. This is the birth cry of a new rebellion. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cassin, the young intelligence officer, stepped forward. We've picked up other signals like this, buried in old archives, hidden in compromised relay stations. All recent. All near strategic zones. Pattern. Yes, sir. Each signal appears roughly 5 days before local unrest spikes. Coordinated. Thorn nodded slowly. They're not just calling their own. They're predicting us. A pause. Rylus asked, do we go to the council with this? No, Thorn said. Not until I know who in the council already knows. The silence that followed was loud. Later that cycle, Thorn stood alone in his private quarters. A war was unfolding, but it hadn't begun on battlefields. It had begun in whispers and encrypted frequencies, in misdirection and memory. He keyed in another private file, one locked behind layers of clearance. Operation Hollow Spear, the Council's hidden project during the Xintar conflict. A psychological division trained to create false resistance cells, infiltrate real ones, and manipulate public unrest. The man in charge of the division? Counselor Merrick. Thorn stared at the screen. If Voss had lived, if Hollow Spear had turned against its masters, then Marek's hand wasn't just stained, it was steering the storm. He needed more. He needed proof. And that meant going to the one place he swore never to return. Xintar. He summoned Rylus. Plot a course to the Xintar remains. Silent approach. No council report. No fleet. Just us. Her brow furrowed. That planet's quarantined. Still irradiated. Nothing lives there. Maybe. But if Voss wanted me to hear that message, it wasn't to taunt me. He looked out at the stars again. It was an invitation. The engines rumbled as the Resolute veered off its patrol vector, slicing through the void toward a forgotten battlefield, toward secrets long buried in ash and shadow. And somewhere, deep beneath layers of rock and silence, something waited. Something old. Something angry. The past was no longer content to stay buried. It was rising. The descent to Xintar felt like diving into the breath of a dead god. The atmosphere, still laced with radiation, flickered with electrical discharges as the Resolute pushed through layers of charged cloud. The planet below was a scar. Ashen plains, skeletal cities, glassed craters where oceans once shimmered. The storm that had ended the uprising had not passed. It had calcified, preserved every wound in silence. Thorn stood aboard the lander as it broke through the clouds, flanked by Rylus and a team of elite recon soldiers. Each wore armor sealed against environmental hazards, but no plating could shield them from what Xintar meant. For Thorn, it was the site of his most brutal victory and his most enduring failure. He had crushed the rebellion, but in doing so, he had become something less than human, something efficient, something necessary. The lander touched down near the ruins of Kesari Prime, once the capital city, now a collapsed skeleton of steel and stone. The wind moaned through broken buildings like the voices of the fallen. A flicker of motion registered on Thorn's HUD. His rifle snapped up. Nothing. Just a drifting shard of debris, caught in a downdraft. But the tension in his spine didn't fade. Scan for life signs, he ordered. Local or artificial? One of the scouts answered. Faint readings. Below us. Deep. They followed the signal through the ruins. The streets were littered with old banners, faded with time. The Resistance emblem, an upward-pointing blade against a ring of stars, still marked some of the walls, burned halfway by plasma. As they moved deeper, Thorn's thoughts kept returning to Voss. The man had charisma, fire, vision. He had nearly pulled entire sectors into his orbit. And he had spoken of rot within the council before anyone dared whisper it. Now it seemed he had been right. The scouts uncovered a subterranean entrance buried beneath the wreckage of an old cathedral. Metal stairs spiraled into the dark. Lights flickered as they descended, brushing away cobwebs of ash and ancient dust. At the bottom, they found a chamber, shielded, intact. A vault, and someone inside. The lights activated with their presence. A slow hum filled the air as emergency systems kicked in. A hologram shimmered to life in the center of the room. It was Voss, not alive, but recorded. Yet the message was recent. If you've made it here, the recording began, then you've begun to understand. The council is not broken. It was built this way. Controlled dissent. Manufactured conflict. Merrick, he orchestrated the war, fed it, prolonged it. Zentar was never meant to survive. We were a trial. A calibration. The figure leaned forward. But if you're here, Thorn, it means you're ready to face what you became to serve them. And maybe undo it. The recording ended. A console beside it flickered, displaying encrypted files. Schematics, troop logs, black operations tied directly to Merrick and other council members. Evidence. Enough to expose everything. Rylus breathed. He knew we'd find this. He planned it. Thorn didn't answer. He was already copying the files to a secure drive. His hands, steady in every battle, now trembled. Not from fear. From clarity. Everything he had done, every campaign, every execution, had served a truth far darker than rebellion. But clarity did not bring peace. As they ascended to the surface, a warning flashed across their comms. Unmarked vessel approaching. Armed. Intercept course. Thorn's eyes narrowed. He knows. The sky above them cracked open as a sleek black ship dropped through the clouds. No insignia. No transmission. Only weapons charged and targeted. A voice, cold and familiar, echoed through the comms. General Thorn, you are in violation of Article 9. You are to surrender all unauthorized data and personnel. Merrick. His voice was sterile, scrubbed of emotion. But the intent was clear. No return, no witnesses. Rylus snapped into motion. Shields are holding, but not for long. They raced back to the lander. Debris exploded around them as the enemy ship began strafing runs. One of the recon scouts was caught in a blast, disappearing in a flash of fire and dust. Thorn didn't flinch. There was no time to mourn. Only move. They lifted off just as a missile struck the edge of the launch pad, throwing the lander into a sharp spin. Rylus fought the controls, teeth gritted. Engines unstable. We won't make orbit. Then we vanish, Thorn said. Signal resolute. Emergency recovery. Cloaked extraction pattern Echo 7. The lander skimmed the surface, trailing smoke. Above, the black ship pursued, but Resolute had already responded. A sudden burst of EMP from orbit blanked the enemy sensors. Thorn's lander vanished into the storm. On board the Resolute, silence reigned as Thorn stepped into the war room, the drive clutched in one gloved hand. He placed it on the central table. We have the proof. Merrick betrayed the council. Or worse, he is the council. Casson looked pale. This could tear the council apart. Thorn turned to him. It should. He tapped a console, sending the data through encrypted channels to loyal allies. Counselors like Sarah Dallin, dissidents, and resistance remnants. The truth would spread like fire. Not all would believe, but enough would. Rylus approached. What now? Thorn looked out at the stars, at the council's domain stretching endlessly across light years. Now we burn down the lie, he said, and see what survives. Far above, in the crystalline halls of the council, Merrick stood before a silent conclave. A report blinked on the display before him. Asset Theta compromised. Subject, Thorn declared rogue. Contingency protocol, active. He turned to the others, face carved from stone. The war has begun. No one spoke. They all knew. There would be no more shadows. Only fire.